Hey everyone, it's Minigame, your short form soccer history show. In this episode, I'll be talking about Hakoah, one of the great names in U.S. soccer history. Alright, first off, we're going to talk about the progenitor of that Hakoah name, SC Sport Club Hakoah Wien. So, formed in 1929, Hakoah Wien was an all-Jewish club from Vienna, Austria. They wore blue and white jerseys with a large Star of David as their badge, and they drew Jewish players from across Europe. They were in the Austrian top division in the 1920s and 1930s. They weren't what you'd call a great club, but they did win one championship in that league in 1924 and 1925. Now, why they became a very popular club is because they did tours over the countries that were really popular of the people who lived there. So for our discussion, the most important was in April and May of 1926 when the Hakoah Wien tour toured the U.S. to massive crowds. They normally had games regularly in the 20,000 and 30,000 range. The biggest of those was over 45,000 at the Polo Grounds against a New York All-Star squad. Okay, following the tour, many of those players of Hakoah Wien stayed in the United States and ended up joining American Soccer League clubs. American Soccer League at that point in the 1920s was the major pro soccer league in the U.S. All right, we're going to move on to talk about the Hakoah All-Stars. All right, really quickly, we're going to talk about the Soccer Wars very, very briefly. So the U.S. Soccer Wars happened in 1928 and 1929. As I said very, very briefly, Soccer Wars were about a power struggle between the American Soccer League and the U.S. Football Association, now called the U.S. Soccer Federation, USSF. This power struggle was about who would control pro soccer in the U.S. and actually kind of generally soccer in the U.S. So 3 teams split from the American Soccer League a month in the 1928-1929 season and helped form the newly sanctioned Eastern Soccer League that the USFA backed. The ASL continued as an outlaw league unsanctioned by the USFA. The New York Giants, one of the former ASL clubs to form the ESL, was owned by Maurice Vandeweghe. This ESL league was new and needed members to keep it going, so Vandeweghe formed a club called the Hakoah All-Stars. This team, at its core, was a group of Jewish ASL players, many of whom came from Hakoah Wien, who jump shipped from the ASL to the new ESL team. For the next season, for the 1929-1930 season, Nathan Agar, who was the owner of the ASL's Brooklyn Wanderers, formed a completely new Hakoah Soccer Football Club to compete in the New York area with the Hakoah All-Stars. All right, with the ESL All-Stars playing in the Bronx and the ASL Hakoah Club playing in Brooklyn, these clubs were often, and still to this day, referred to as New York Hakoah for the ESL All-Stars and Brooklyn Hakoah for the ASL club, even though their names were actually Hakoah All-Stars and the Hakoah Soccer Football Club. The soccer war damaged both leagues. It damaged individual clubs, and it kind of damaged U.S. soccer itself. So in October of 1929, basically, the ASL sued for peace, and the USL ended up creating what was called the Atlantic Coast Soccer League, which was a merged league made up of most of the ASL clubs and the best of the ESL clubs. So the ASL disappeared. The ESL actually continued for a little bit in a lower level fashion and eventually disappeared. The Atlantic Coast League was a completely new league made up of these merged clubs who became now the sanctioned pro major soccer league in the U.S. Going a little bit before that, prior to this 1929-1930 season, the USFA mandated that Vandeweghe could only own one club. So what he did is he sold the Hakoah All-Stars to Dr. Max Krause. When the ACSL was formed, the USFA then ordered Nate Agar to disband his Brooklyn Hakoah team who had been playing in the ASL for basically the same reason, because they didn't want Agar to control and own 2 clubs, the Hakoah Club, the Brooklyn Hakoah Club, and his Brooklyn Wanderers. So basically practically what happened is when the ACSL was formed, the Hakoah All-Stars replaced the defunct ASL Hakoah Club in the ACSL. It wasn't a merger of the two clubs, the Brooklyn Hakoah Club and the Hakoah All-Stars. The ASL disappeared, the ACSL was formed. The USFA told Nate Agar he had to get rid of his Brooklyn Hakoah team, which he did, and the Hakoah All-Stars joined the Atlantic Coast Soccer League. The Hakoah All-Stars remained in that league, which actually basically quickly renamed itself as the American Soccer League, as that competition limped through the next few years due to the fallout of the soccer wars and the Great Depression. The Hakoah All-Stars changed ownership prior to the 1933 league season and was renamed National Hakoah. The team played under that National Hakoah name in January and February of 1933 during the National Challenge Cup, which is now called the U.S. Open Cup, but withdrew from the ASL before the 1933 spring season and folded. So we've talked about the progenitor Hakoah Bean Club. We've talked about the Hakoah All-Stars, New York Hakoah, and Hakoah Soccer Football Club, Brooklyn Hakoah. So we're going to talk about the next kind of U.S. club with well known for that name, Hakoah AC. So we're actually going to go back before what we're just talking about. We're going to go all the way back to July of 1926, just after the Hakoah Bean Tour of the U.S., when the Hakoah Athletic Club was formed in New York. This club actually originated from a 5-year-old Maccabean Athletic Club. Dr. Max Krause, if you remember him, the second owner of All-Stars, was actually president of the formation of the Hakoah Athletic Club. This club ended up becoming a member of the International Soccer League of New York, the Empire State League of New York, and the German American League of the New York metro area, and it eventually joined the National Soccer League of the New York area. So the NASL was a semi-pro league that played at a lower level of the American Soccer League. The Hakoah AC actually played the All-Stars in 1932 in a friendly, so they were completely two separate clubs, even though Dr. Krause was involved at some point in time with both. In early October of 1948, 2 weeks into the ASL season, Hakoah Athletic Club purchased the American Soccer League franchise of the Brooklyn Wanderers. So this is a new version of the Brooklyn Wanderers, post-World War II version, not related to Nat Agar's earlier American Soccer League version we talked about. Hakoah AC jumped from the National Soccer League to the American Soccer League. They took on the Wanderers record, which was only 1 or 2 games because it was the beginning of the season, and completed the schedule for that 1948-1949 season that was originally the Wanderers. So this Hakoah AC club was usually referred to simply as Hakoah, but has become known over time and now known as Brooklyn Hakoah because it played most of its seasons in that borough. So that's Hakoah AC, now kind of called Brooklyn Hakoah. We're now going to move on and chat about a club sometimes called Hakoah Americans. So when Hakoah AC, which we were just talking about, joined the ASL in 1948 and 1949, a club called the New York Americans was already a longtime member of the league. The Americans were owned by former Hakoah Bean player Erno Schwartz, who left that club to join the ASL's New York Giants after the 1926 tour. Schwartz moved to the Hakoah All-Stars and then eventually joined a newly organized New York Americans as player manager during the second half of the 1931 ASL season. Schwartz would eventually acquire ownership of the New York Americans club, and that club would stay in the ASL through the 1955-1956 season. So from the 1948-49 season through the 1955-1956 season, the Hakoah AC and New York Americans were part of that league. And remember, the Hakoah AC was formed way back in July of 1926, even before New York Americans was formed in 1931. So completely separate organizations. So after that 1955-1956 ASL season, the Hakoah Club of Brooklyn, Hakoah AC, and the New York Americans merged to become what was called New York Hakoah, basically a combined club with the best players of both clubs. That club won the ASL the next 3 seasons, that 56-57 season 57-58 season and 58-59 season. They were called both New York Hakoah and simply Hakoah at that time. For the 1962, 63, and 1963 and 64 seasons, that Hakoah club was renamed as the Hakoah Americans for those 2 seasons. For the next season, 64-65, the Hakoah Americans were promoted to the Super Regional Eastern Soccer Conference. This turned out to be an only 1-year league that was made up of the best teams of the American Soccer League and the best teams from the German American League, which was located in the New York metro area. During that season, the Hakoah Americans returned to the New York Americans name. It actually turned out what to be was its last year in competition. So that's kind of it for the Hakoah clubs in U.S. soccer history. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll be back soon with another quick hit of soccer history.